Thanks for signing in, everybody. Tonight we have Dr. Sos from Cornell University. He's going to give us a nice talk on innovation and invention. So without further ado, Dr. Sos, if you guys have any questions, by all means, either type them to me or you can unmute your microphone and just kind of, these are typically casual. So thanks for doing this, Dr. Sos.
My pleasure. So welcome, and hopefully I'll be able to teach you a little bit about how to innovate and invent. And trust me, you don't have to be an Einstein, I hope. So it's really more understanding what to some people comes very naturally, and for others maybe perhaps a somewhat learned and acquired process. Obviously in all of us it's some combination of the above. By the way, can you guys hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, terrific. So what I want to do is talk to you about innovation, which is at least for myself, is largely an intuitive process. And obviously you can't learn intuition, but you can learn how to intuit. These are my potential conflicts. I'm sure you all know about the Sos MD, the OmniFlush, the tornado coil. These are my primary royalties, none of which, well, actually they sort of come up. So let's talk about what the intuitive process really entails. The first thing is that as you go through life, and I'm not talking just about medicine, but as you go through life, you really ought to train yourself to observe everything that you see around you. And my wife has often said that walking around with me on the streets of Manhattan is like dragging a little 5-year-old, because I'm constantly staring up at the rooftops and store windows and architecture, buses, cars, whatever, and constantly observing and looking. And it's important to always keep your eyes and all your senses open and alive. Look at everything around you that you touch or use and see. It's amazing how many people look, but they don't see. So it's important to make seeing part of looking. And then evaluate it and assess what it is that you're looking at. Is it okay? Does it do what it's supposed to do? If not, what's wrong? Is there a better way? And what is it? So these are the kinds of things that you really need to sort of keep in mind as you, I jumped a little ahead of myself, sorry. So if if you see that there is something wrong or something doesn't work, then you really need to ask yourself, can it be improved, replaced? How and what? Is your solution or improvement conceptually and technically simple? Then just do it. In fact, my past trainee and for 15 or 20 years, my colleague David Trost he pasted this old Nike ad on my office door about 10 or 15 years ago as an acknowledgement of my not only inventive style but lifestyle. And I think it's a very important one. Just do it. So if you have a solution, then if it's relatively conceptually and technically simple, then you can self-finance and go it alone. There's one major caveat, and that is your relationship and contractual relationship with your employer, whether it be a medical school, a hospital, a university, or a practice. And each of these have very different and very sometimes very cruel policies regarding the sharing of intellectual property. And the rules can be extremely difficult to decipher. And I think that if any of you have any ideas, and if you have looked at the intellectual property agreement of your organization, then you need to really study it very carefully. And quite honestly, I don't think any of you are really capable of, myself included, really figuring out what your obligations are and what your legal responsibilities are. And so it behooves you to, if you have an idea that you really believe to be potentially profitable, I think it behooves you to find out what you should do. In fact, you should probably investigate even prior to having an idea, certainly prior to doing anything about it, what the legal implications are. For instance, in many of the university intellectual property agreements, it will say that an idea or an innovation or invention will belong to the university if it was conceived under university time or in the process of your employment, and it will specifically or may specifically state that using certain resources of the university or medical school or hospital or practice do or do not constitute a obligation on your part to either disclose it or to have it belong to the university. So, for instance, at Cornell New York Hospital, using the hospital/university medical school library or using your office does not constitute using university resources. Using their laboratories, etc., might. So I think you need to be very, very clear as to what constitutes using any resources that might otherwise, if otherwise you weren't obligated to give part of your profits to the university or whatever institution. If you use their resources, then you might be obligated to do so. So this is really very, very important, and it needs to be looked at. If any of you think you may have ideas, I recommend that you read through the relevant sections of this in your agreements. And as I say, plus minus consult a lawyer, either regarding the idea or even better, regarding the obligations you have to the employer. And the next step is to do a patent or literature search. Now, this can involve you looking on the U.S. Patent Office site, and there are many different ways under which you can search. And I promise you, no matter which one you pick, you'll be frustrated as hell because it's not simple. There are obviously specialists who do nothing but do patent searches, and they get reasonably well rewarded for doing so. So it could cost you $1,000 to several $1,000s to have a patent search done on your behalf to figure out whether or not your idea is patentable. Now, I warn you, sometimes they'll come back and they say, well, there is X, Y, and Z patent that's standing in the way. And I wouldn't be dissuaded so easily because they are not while they are very good in terms of the technicalities of patent law, they may or may not appreciate that certain companies might decide to purchase a medical device even if there are some potential patent conflicts, because they understand that a fait accompli of having produced a device will allow them to negotiate from a position of some strength against those who hold the patent, as opposed to not having anything. So it's a good guide, but the next step, I think, is really very important. And of course, if you have gone to your employer and they say that they own a large or some part of your patent, or at least the right or first refusal, what then happens is from then on they will provide the funding and with your approval or consultation, an attorney and a patent search, etc. Some of the employers' patent or intellectual property right agreements or rules are incredibly predatory. And in certain institutions, universities, the university ends up, if the idea is somewhat successful, basically ends up taking 90%, as much as 90% of the profit. So in a sense, they almost discourage you from having a good idea. But that's just how it is. So somehow or other, a patent or literature search is very important. And the next step is to come up with a simple description and drawings, and it can be on the back of a napkin, and then a provisional patent, and eventually a final patent is signed. Now, most people have no clue that provisional patents exist, and it's important for you to understand what it does, what it is, and what it does not. So a provisional patent can be extraordinarily simple, and you can literally write it on a piece of paper, scribble some diagrams if you wish, and submit it. There is absolutely no judgment by the patent office in terms of the value, worth, or validity of a patent. So getting a provisional patent does nothing, or rather getting a provisional patent doesn't mean that the patent office thinks or admits or agrees that your invention has any value. They simply file it. It's $500, so it's very cheap, or reasonably cheap. What it does do is any and all ideas that you specifically state in your provisional patent is protected for the period of 1 year. And that 1 year is yours to come up with a final patent. And the final patent, obviously, is the one that is then evaluated by the patent office for any potential conflicts with pre-existing patents, etc. So it's very important, if you really have a very good idea, again, to perhaps consult a patent lawyer. And I wouldn't just go into any patent law. I mean, I would go to medical device patent law. And what you need is as detailed a provisional as possible, because only the ideas that you have put into the provisional are protected for the duration of that year. So if someone else comes up with a similar idea and uses some ideas or concepts that you did not protect in your provisional, you may be screwed. So it's very, very important that the provisional be as complete as you can make it. On the other hand, you don't want to spend a year preparing your provisional, because for the duration you are not protected. Also, very few people know, if you disclose an idea to anyone without a non-disclosure agreement prior to the issuance of a patent, your patent is potentially invalid. So that means you can't be blabbing to all your best friends, some of whom may decide to screw you by getting a provisional before you get one, or by simply too widely disclosing, and certainly any public disclosure that can be recorded or recalled can invalidate a later patent. So you need to be very careful about that. This was a scribble I made in November of 2006. It was a design to replace the hook type capture device on inferior vena cava. Filters, I always thought capturing or catching those hooks was quite cumbersome, and thought that some derivative of a sphere might be more helpful. And I came up with a hemispherical or 3/4 or 2/3 sphere with grooves cut on the side for the capture sheath to slide into. And this is a much easier way to capture vena cava filters. And so you can see this very primitive thing that literally scribble that went in as part of a provisional. And you can see sometimes later a final patent was filed. So it's a relatively straightforward process, but you've got to follow the rules. Now, if your idea is conceptually and technically complex, obviously you still have to go through many of the same steps. But self-financing and going it alone become almost impossible, and you really need help. The Stanford Biodesign course is really the model, and they really do it right. This is a course taught at Stanford University with the use of specialists from the medical school, from biology, whatever. It's a multi-specialty, potentially very multi-specialty organization, and they draw on the best minds from the medical and basic science fields to get together to solve a problem. So obviously, if you want to develop a better artificial heart, it's unlikely that you're going to sketch it out by yourself and come up with a provisional. So this is more like the Manhattan Project approach to design, and I suspect few of you will be involved in that, but that's a totally different thing, and it's much less intuitive and much more organized and much more sort of aligned to not having you have ownership, or at least ownership by yourself. So you really need expert technical engineering, etc. advice, and you will more than likely need outside financial support, which, if you use university resources, will be helped by them. Now, it is also possible that a university may look at a concept and say to you, you know what, we're not interested. It's yours, do with it as you wish. And there are many ideas out there. I think that the Palma stent was one of those that the university had no interest in wanting. I'm sure they are still kicking themselves all over the place for that smart decision. So let me just show you the kinds of ideas over the past too many years I have come up with. And not all of these are patents, but these are all various inventions and patents. And my first idea was a pressure relief valve in an angioplasty balloon catheter, which would have prevented the early very compliant PVC balloons from rupturing and basically cutting the arteries when they ruptured by limiting the pressure that you could apply to the balloon. And then the Sos open-ended guide wire was the first commercially available microcatheter. And then it goes on and on and on. And I think tornado embolization coil, which very few people know I invented, but I did back in 1985. It wasn't commercially made till '96. Sos omni-selective, omni-flush. I designed the Viper tibial angioplasty balloon for SIR-RFS back in '93, etc., etc. The pulse view needle, which at one time was a big deal. And so here you see some of the ideas. So, and these are some provisional patents. Actually, the thrombus removal and intravascular distal embolic protection device is in the process of trying to be commercialized. Now, as part of what I talked about, it's not just medical devices. Everything in life that I look at and touch, I start thinking about. So one day I was berating myself for watching football instead of doing something useful, and I saw a horrendous face mask holding penalty. The defensive back almost twisted off the receiver's head by grabbing the face mask, and it occurred to me that if they made the face mask part of the helmet detachable, held in place by firm rubber sprockets, then it could be, because basically it's trying to protect you from having somebody's fist jammed into your face, but not from somebody twisting your head. So if somebody grabbed your face mask and pulled on it, it would come off in his hand. And a couple of other things that made sense. So, you know, your ideas shouldn't be limited to medicine. Obviously, many will be. One of the ideas I came up with a long time ago after I hurt my back was a mobile radiation shield, and these were just some of the early mock-ups on how to commercialize it. And frankly, in the last now 40 years, 30 years, I have not been able to wear a full lead apron. What I now do is wear a lead bib, and here you see the radiation shield. So the bottom part of the skirt I do not wear. And you can see that the shield has rolling wheels, and it's height adjustable. It's made out of lead, quite heavy. The height is adjustable. It can be draped with a sterile shield, and I can do procedures on a patient hiding behind it without wearing a weighty apron. And this has prolonged my career for the last 30 years and made me be able to ski and play tennis instead of wasting it on doing procedures. Back in the early 80s, I designed a beak on the balloon catheter for renal angioplasty. This was when our catheters were a little bulky, the wires were flimsy, and as you began to push the angioplasty balloon into the renal artery through a osteal stenosis, it would often not make it and pull the wire out. This little beak allowed the catheter to begin to enter the artery more easily. No patent, was a cute idea. Similarly, the Rosen wire was a straight wire that Bob Rosen at NYU designed for Cook, but I always hated the fact that it had a 3 millimeter diameter J wire that I thought was potentially traumatic to the renal artery branches. So I had Cook make what they then called the New York Hospital wire. I called it the straight Rosen, and I could pre-shape the wire by putting a bend across the orthorenal angle at 90 degrees and a slight bend in the tip so it'd be more flexible and go into low branches, and that way I was able to do renal artery angioplasty and stenting without the wires and the catheters moving around on me. The pulsar needle designed for angiodynamics, it unfortunately didn't sell well because people wanted to see blood spurting. But you can see that there was a diaphragm built into the hub of the needle and a little sidearm proximal to it with a reservoir of air and a lure lock. So if you hooked up a syringe and you weren't sure whether there was an obstructive lesion or whatever, why the wire wasn't going, you could do a test injection and even a roadmap to get the wire in. It was a neat idea, it worked, but people wanted to see blood squirting. Here's another version of it. Now, the OmniFlush was an outgrowth of the fact that with both the conventional pigtail and with the racket to some extent, much of the contrast goes cephalad. And that goes to someplace you don't need. With the OmniFlush, the contrast either goes caudally or sideways. Can you guys see the hand arrow, the cursor?
Yeah, Dr. Sos. Thanks.
Okay, good. So you can see that it changed the delivery of contrast, made it more efficient. And this is just how the OmniFlush is deployed. With all the Omni catheters, you really need to get the wire out of there as soon as possible. I don't pre-straighten it. I just put it over the wire when I need to. And you can see it's important for it to be able to come back to its previous level. Otherwise, it will not be able to spring back. And here you see a comparison on a patient before renal angioplasty and after renal angioplasty. The pre was done with a pigtail, and it was a little high because you can see that there are branches of the celiac and the SMA. But the point was to show the amount of reflux as well as the opacification of the SMA and celiac branches that overlap and make it harder to see the renals. This was after angioplasty. You can see the vessel is wide open, but you can also see that with the no reflux, the same amount of contrast and at the same time in filming shows a much denser concentration of contrast in the region of interest. And that's what it's really all about. So with the OmniFlush, you could inject the same or less contrast as with a conventional catheter, but see the area that you needed to much better because there was no reflux into unintended branches and better concentration. The other cute little thing that occurred purely by dumb luck is that the tip to primary curve of the OmniFlush is 15 millimeters. So when people struggle to try to electronically calibrate and measure the width of an artery, if that portion of the catheter is next to the renal artery, it's very easy to literally take a piece of paper, magnify it on the film, and count off, just mark off thirds, and each of these is 5 millimeter, overlap it with the renal artery, and measure the size or diameter of the renal vessel. This is even more accurate, really, than all the fancy electronic calibration, and takes a second. And you can see the appropriately sized stents in the arteries. It's also a better catheter for crossing the bifurcation. That was one of the ways and reasons it was designed. And you can see that as the wire, in this case a angled glide, is introduced, it begins to go down the opposite iliac. And then the important thing is to pull it down so the primary curve is just over the bifurcation, and the wire goes down to the opposite iliac, and the catheter follows. Any of you who've ever tried to do this with a pigtail know how it bounces all over the place, and it's very hard to orient and to keep fixed. And if you have a diseased abdominal aorta, you can do a lot of damage. And this shows that you can also deflect the wire from the opposite wall and then twist the catheter to go down. The OmniFlush is also great for subclavian entry. Here you see it coming in from the left. When the wire goes in, it shoots down the transverse aortic arch into the descending thoracic aorta, and the wire can be advanced down the descending thoracic aorta, and the catheter will easily follow. this prevents a lot of fishing around. And here's a patient with the wire in the ascending aorta. You can see the omniflush being introduced. By the way, you should always do this in the LAO, so you can open up the aortic arch. And here you see the omniflush just in the transverse aorta, pull the wire back, advance it into the descending thoracic aorta, and advance the wire. Now, few people realize that the formation or reformation of the omniselective should be done very carefully just below the arch. And it was designed to do that. So you can see when you get it up to the arch, and I always use a Benson here, you pull the Benson out, and if the diameter of the aorta is a little narrow for the omniselective you pick, you simply push up gently and twist. It will deform itself. The next step is to advance the wire, and the temptation is to just advance the wire and push it. If you do that, you'll be pushing it into the wall. So what you want to do is, while you're advancing the wire out the tip of the omniselective, you should be also pushing the shaft upwards. And that allows the wire to deflect downwards and form this nice gentle shape. And when you bring it down into the abdominal aorta, this gentle curve is less likely to dissect or to strip off any plaque, because it's a nice smooth arc, as you see, bringing it down to the level of the renals. Now, why was the Omni such a big deal? Well, because it does what the Simmons or the Sidewinder did, but it does it better. And you know that the Simmons and the Sidewinder either have to be reshaped in the cerebrovascular circulation, and so if you cause somebody a stroke by screwing around in here when you just wanted to do an abdominal procedure, that's not really cool. So the other option is to try to do it in the aortic bifurcation. So all of that is avoided by having the omniflush, which it was measured out to be easy to deform just below the arch, where it can do virtually no harm. Now, another one of my ideas that is little recognized is the tornado. And I'm telling you this not to brag, but to show you the process of how you come up with ideas. So the original helical cylindrical geometrical coil was created back in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was a wire that assumed the shape of a cylinder, and you can see these tufts. But as you look down the barrel, you can see that blood could continue to go flowing right down the middle of the barrel. In fact, the mechanism of deployment and the potential ineffectiveness of vessel occlusion with the geometrical coil was that when it was deployed, properly matching the diameter of the vessel to the coil, it formed a cylinder, which often allowed continued flow. And when it did work, it worked because it was deployed in a vessel where it sort of got jammed up, and the loops of the coil got totally deformed into a tangle. And if you use multiple coils, they sort of overlapped each other and tangled, and that's why they worked. So they didn't work because of the way they were designed. They worked in spite of the fact. So I started thinking about this, and I realized that if you could design a coil that sealed itself, rather than depending on good luck in how it became deformed and tangled, then I realized that a self-sealing conical helical coil, which I called the Christmas tree coil because that's what it looked like, would seal itself. And I designed this back in 1985, gave the idea to Cook, and they basically came back to me and said, you know what, it's a great idea, but we have little old ladies making these cylindrical coils, and they simply cannot make these. You know, they were able to make me a couple of prototypes, but that they cannot do this on a commercial large volume delivery. So I actually was a speaker at one of the guest symposia here in New York, and that was the coming out party. Up to that point, really very few, if any, knew that I had designed the tornado. So this was a 28-year-old with SB aortic regurg and enlarging painful left gluteal myocardic pseudoaneurysm. And here you see the SOS coil. I still have an unopened package that's left. This is the original SOS Christmas tree embolization coil from 1985, which is now I don't even want to know, 37 years ago, whatever. I think it's 37 years. 27. Whatever the heck it is. Anyway, so this is the original coil that I left unopened. And this is the teaching file jacket of the first patient. You can see June 21, 85. I did not make up this teaching file. Somebody else wrote on it, SOS special coil cone shape. And you can see this is an injection into the superior gluteal and massive extravasation of contrast. You can see the horrible vessel. And I deployed a single tornado coil. It totally stopped flow. And you can see that the deployed coil and the tornado are exact lookalikes, even almost 40 years later. So, if you follow the intuitive process, I'm sure you'll have a lot of blind channels. Do not get discouraged. The simple truth is that most good ideas have already been thought of. Your task is to find one that hasn't. A corollary, but a very important one of that is, if you thought it, but did not pursue it and develop it, it did not and will not happen. And in fact, just today, I had to go through my files looking for some stuff, and I came up on a drawing I had submitted to a company which was rejected back in 1995 for a clot aspiration catheter. Guess what? Cardiologists today are using a version of that, and somebody's making a ton of money, and mine is sitting in my file because I submitted it to one company who chose not to do anything with it, and I didn't pursue it. I thought it, but did not pursue and develop it. It did not happen. And now probably there is enough patent protection that it will never happen. So if you think it, go for it. And further, even if you submit it to a reputable company, only one in thousands of good ideas will become product. But keep at it, you'll get better, and it will happen. Thanks, guys. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Dr. Sos, that was great. Very inspirational and historic and techniques. And thank you again for giving that talk. I'll open it up for questions. You guys can either unmute or text them in, and I'll be happy to say them. But first and foremost, thanks. That was great.
You're welcome.
I guess I don't know if people might start thinking of questions, but I had one. Did you have any comments on the new FDA medical device regulations or anything with that?
Frankly, I haven't kept up with them. I don't know what they've done now. They keep tinkling and playing with them. I'm not sure that these are usually sort of details that may or may not affect you. I don't think we need to worry about that right now, regardless of what it may be. Clearly, in the United States, it's continuously more and more difficult to get new ideas to be carried out, and increasingly, medical innovation is shifting to Europe, where the European regulators are a lot more willing to not really take chances, but they are a lot more willing to be practical. But the FDA goes hot and cold. So recently they made some noises that they're going to become more reasonable. I am not familiar in detail with their newest. But if you are, please share with the audience so I can learn too.
All right. I think, does anybody have any questions for Dr. Sos while we have him and we have his attention? Okay, we have one coming in right now.
By the way, feel free to share my email address.
I definitely will. If you guys can either text or email that SIR-RFS@gmail account, I'd be more than happy to get you in touch with Dr. Sos. We have a question from Scales J.
I thought I saw the question, where do I get my inspiration? Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's the question from.
Well, I think that was the whole point. I don't know whether the person asking the question started from the beginning. May I ask? Was the person asking the question in from the beginning?
Yes.
So,
yes.
As I said, I don't have any special muse, although my wife will be salted. But it's really, I don't hold myself out to be, all that different. I mean, I do have an interesting background in that my maternal grandfather was a very famous painter, world famous. Many people on my father's side are world famous mathematicians. My dad was a physician. But honestly, I guess I combine a lot of these genes and have both artistic as well as scientific interests. But honestly, it's the observation and seeing and pardon me, and questioning everything. I think that's really the critical issue that most people, people say to me, well, gee, how come you came up with X, Y, and Z? And my retort to that is, how come you've been doing this for 30 years and you never said to yourself, gee, this catheter really doesn't work right. I wonder if I just shape the tip differently or use a different material or whatever, it might work better. So the point is to use your common sense. And if you think that there is something that you see that's not working right, whether it's in medicine or elsewhere, start thinking about how to fix it or improve it or replace it. Does that answer the question? Thank you. Yes. Good.
I have another question, Dr. Sos. Another two questions. One, how do you approach a company with a product idea, and how do you become a consultant for a company?
Well, becoming a consultant is if they ask you to become a consultant, you're not going to go up to Cook and say, gee, I'd like to consult for you. They have to, for some reason, you either have to be a thought leader clinically or in terms of research, or come to their attention in some other fashion to become a consultant. As far as how do you contact one? I think that most companies nowadays, if they are ethical and smart, will not discuss with you, even informally, and you shouldn't discuss with them I can't tell you how many ideas I lost by discussing them informally with what I thought were well-meaning, all kinds of people. But certainly nowadays, no reputable ethical company will discuss any ideas with you until or unless you have provisional patent and you have signed a mutual non-disclosure agreement. So those are the absolute minimums. And if you don't know anybody at any company, there are two ways that you can sort of, as a young person, get there. One is to contact someone that you, a more senior person who has some contact. The second way is to ask your local rep if you think that a certain company has products that align with your ideas. You can ask the rep to introduce you to whoever, and then you can work your way up the chain. That can be a little laborious, but will make your local rep feel good. And the third way is to go to a big national meeting, go up to their booth, and say that you have some ideas and you'd like to, is there somebody that you could talk to who is responsible for product development? And often there are people hanging out. They usually have busy days because there are some more senior people who are proven and with whom they'll, set up time. But often they or their immediate junior subordinates or partners will have time for you. So those are the ways in which you begin to approach companies. Again, feel free to use my email address. It's certainly on the SIR members website, and I'm sure they can share it with you here.
We have an additional question about patent laws and your experiences, Dr. Sos. The specific question is, have you had to employ lawyers versed in international patent law? And have you had any instances where your U.S. patents were infringed upon internationally, whether it's Europe or Asia?
Yeah, it's in some cases I think it's a good idea to get international patents, and I honestly have not paid very much attention to it because interestingly, catheter shapes are non-patentable. So the Sos Omni and the Omni Flush are both non-patentable products. The reason they succeeded was because I guess they work, and also because AngioDynamics had such a strong lead in introducing them, and they really got the materials correct. I was not responsible for the soft tube material that AngioDynamics put on the Omni Selective and the Omni Flush, but they clearly contributed to the success of the catheters. And frankly, all the large catheter companies knocked it off within a year or two. Cook, Cordis, Boston Scientific, they all had their version of my catheters, but they never really made much of a headway because people were used to using the AngioDynamics ones. So, that's an alternate pathway, but that's more for companies to decide rather than for you to worry about. So if you have no patent, it may not be insane to even get a provisional on a catheter shape. If I knew then what I know now, I might still do that, just so that you would have some protection when you spoke to them in addition to the non-disclosure agreement. But that's absolutely vital at a minimum.
All right. Any other questions for Dr. Sos while we have him? All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Sos, for giving us some time tonight, and hopefully we look forward to setting up another talk with you in the future.
My pleasure. Please stay in touch, and I'll be happy to stay in touch with anybody else through my email, okay? Take care, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, Dr. Sauce.